Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. How do we not have that recorded yet, guys? I don't know. Anyway, I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with Jeffrey Poole and Joe Lalo. We don't have
Hello.
a guest. We don't have a guest this week, so it's just going to be whatever we want to talk about. Now, we actually have a topic. We're going to talk about marketing different kinds of series. We're going to try to touch on standalone books too. None of us are experts on that, but I do know I've kind of run into a lot of sci-fi people in particular that just say, you know, I have an idea for one book and that's it. So how do I market that? So we're going to talk about standalones and kind of the pros and cons and different types of series that you can do. So if you haven't decided yet maybe what you want to write, maybe something here will help. Before we jump into that, I guess it's been a while since it's just been the three of us. So does anybody have any news?
I got some news. I'll start. Right now, the big thing going on with me, aside from NaNoWriMo being over, so I can stop trying to pretend like I was going to get an entire plot done in a month. I usually do. This time it was only I got the word count in, but if you were to read this story, you would see that there are pieces missing. So I might be finishing that up in the next 2 weeks. Zapdos Media, which is a small publisher in Germany, recently published a translation of the first book of my trilogy, and the whole trilogy is eventually going to be translated. But it's in the top 100 in Germany, and it is still in the top 100, I should say, going on 12, 13 days. So I'm doing rather well in Germany. So that's pretty cool.
Let's hear your German. Say your book's name in German.
Der Ewige Krieg. The Perpetual War, actually the Eternal War, but I understand it's a synonym over there. Over here too, I guess. And the only other thing I got going on is I've been getting a lot of people talking to me about my audiobooks, and I don't have, not all of my books are audiobooks, and a lot of them are in the pipeline, but two of them were oddballs, and I couldn't get the original audiobook publisher to pick up the other two books in that series. And nobody else wanted them because 3 books in that series had already been taken by another publisher. So I'm going to be taking care of them on my own. And I was able to get in contact with the same narrator who narrated the trilogy. So I'm probably going to be self-producing a 20-plus hour audiobook, and that's going to be expensive. But yeah, that's I have the money for it. I'm not confident it's going to pay itself back in any reasonable amount of time, but I do like to be comprehensive when I do things. So we'll see. It'll be an ongoing experiment.
Depends how much your narrator is going to charge. So
I found out how she's going to charge, and
okay.
It's significant.
Yeah. Does she come with a producer?
She does. Producer, editor, quality control, etc.
Yeah, that gets up there.
Full on music track with the orchestra and.
And by the way, it became clear to me once I saw the number why the publisher was not interested in the other 2 books, because if they spent that much money on the 3 books that they already did, chances are they're not happy enough with the return on investment to continue pumping money into Joe.
I'm sorry, did I laugh out loud? That would be the same situation.
Hey, don't mock the number 100 top-selling Amazon Germany fantasy author.
Just call me David Hasselhoff. They love me in Germany.
He's got clout.
As for me, I'm wrapping up my mystery novel. I didn't quite make the 56 or 50K in the NaNoWriMo, but I came damn close. I have since made that number, but obviously it's past the time there. So I'm starting working on that cover along with the cover for the new fantasy I'm working on. So that's getting close. Well, let's see, lining up beta readers for both books. That has started. Love Decembers, and on top of which I'm going to be gone for close to 2 weeks in December over at my sister-in-law's house. So don't worry, she's got internet if we do decide to do a show close to Christmas. But so that's going to be fun, being gone from home that long. So it's going to be interesting for me, anyways. I'm still going to release a book this month. I just don't know if it's going to be the fantasy or the mystery. Probably the mystery, but we'll see.
All right. Well, we'll have to see how it goes. Just one book, and is it the first in a series?
It will be the first in a series, yeah.
All right, cool. Well, my news isn't that exciting. I just thought I'd talk about it because it's something that worked well the last time I did it. I'm in a Facebook group for, actually it's for romance authors, but there are a few people in there that do like fantasy romance or sci-fi romance. And I joined it because I think I'd interviewed the person before, so I kind of knew who was running it. And my Dragon Blood series is kind of, sort of, there are love stories. I wouldn't go so far to say it's really like a classic romance, but so anyway, I'm in this group and I've been in it for about a year, and they're always inviting new people into it. And about 4 times a year they run specials. And now this one is, I forget, they've got a whole name for it, like Fill Your Kindle or Blast Your Kindle or something. And it's like everybody takes their free book 1 or whatever it is in their series, a free ebook, and they put it all up on a web page, and everybody promotes it. Everybody that's on the list promotes it to their list, their mailing list. So I think there's like 80 people signed up to do it right now for this holiday one. We're doing it on the 9th, and so it's like, and I email my list, of course, too. And just because you're getting so much exposure, like for me, I did this before last year, and even as a fantasy person, you know, I don't get the downloads that the contemporary romances and the people that fit more specifically with those readerships get, but I still got like 2,000 downloads last year, so I'm hoping to get that again this year. Usually only BookBub is more than that. You know, like when I do a free promo on a lot of the sites that I have to pay for, I don't get that many downloads. So I'm hoping for more this year because there's actually a lot more people in it. So I'm just, I think the fantasy people or the sci-fi people need to do something similar on Facebook, and it could very well be happening, and I'm just not invited to the group, which would be sad, but that's life. But if you are out there, I'd like to be in the group. So, but they also do a couple times a year like 99-cent books too, and it's a really great way to get exposure from other authors in your genre, and definitely worth it. And like I said, it's free, so all you do is, you know, I basically email my list, and that takes like 5 minutes to write up a note and put a link in there to the site that has all of the books in there. So that's coming up for me on the 9th, and yep, that's my news, just mentioning it because just in case somebody else wants to try that in your genre, your niche. It doesn't need to be like 80 people, even if you only have like 10 people, you know, writing in time travel, dystopian, zombie novels, you know, leverage the power of other people's mailing lists. It's a good deal.
That would be an interesting genre. Zombie, time travel, throw in a little bit of romance. That would be fun.
I can speak from experience. If you're going to do romance, you have to go back in time. People want Highlanders and kilts. They do not want dystopian futures. You know, just saying, I might have written that novel, and not with zombies, but I could tell you that everything else on the time travel romance list was Highlanders and kilts, so I was not really a good fit.
You don't want to read a story about 2 scraggly survivors that have, you know, somehow managed to meet up with each other in this dystopian future, fall in love, and people are like, ew. But
it was an awesome story. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a couple of reader comments or questions, both. The first one is from a couple months ago, actually, sorry. This is from Will Norman. We did the podcast kind of talking about on what you want on an author website. And he was just mentioning that, yes, WordPress is a good idea, but you should also check and make sure it's mobile friendly, whichever theme you get. And I know that. I don't have a mobile friendly theme because I've been too lazy to change it, theme that comes up often. But yeah, and he mentioned that you can check on Google to see your current website, see if the theme is mobile friendly. And the website is google.com/webmasters/tools/mobile-friendly. I will put the link in the show notes. And he also mentioned that you can get a pop-up newsletter form to add to your website. He uses sumomi.com. I will put the link in the notes because I'm probably not saying that right, but both good things to check out. Definitely the mobile-friendly thing. So many people surf the web today on their phones that.
Out of curiosity, couldn't you just use your phone to pull up your website and see how it looks? If it's microscopic, then you know it's not mobile-friendly.
I suppose if you want to do that, you could.
Well, there's an extra layer to this, but with Google, I haven't been to that page. I'll have to check it out. But Google is, if you're the kind of person who puts a lot of emphasis on driving traffic to your website, Google ranks websites with good mobile experience higher in the rankings than websites with bad mobile experience. So if it's a Google tool for seeing if it's mobile friendly, that might let you know where you stand in their two-tier ranking structure. I don't drive a lot of traffic to my site, so it's not that key, but if it's a strong platform for you, then mobile friendly literally will improve your Google standings.
Good to know.
This is a recent change they made.
No, I remember that. It's like in the last year or so that they've done that. I have to say, as somebody who surfs the web on my phone, I kind of hate mobile-friendly sites because I can never find what I'm looking for. I just Zoom. Do other people not Zoom? Zoom, yeah. It works. It's great. But we are not the... I do. Just like, I can read it now. Whereas if it's mobile-friendly, there's like a menu that has 3 things in it on a site that has 1,000 things that I want to check out. So I don't know. I think it's still a work in progress, but I do agree it's probably a better idea to have a mobile-friendly theme than not to have one. All right, now a question from Brian Shea. This was he was getting started, I think, and just was wondering about the business side of, well, I will just read the question. Do you all maintain separate PayPal and bank accounts for your writing-related income and expenses, or do you use your existing personal PayPal account? Does PayPal even let you have 2 accounts? For tax purposes and to avoid being audited, authors considering LLCs are advised to keep writing and personal expenses separate. So do you guys want to share what you do?
Me personally, I just treat it like any other normal paycheck, and I don't have a separate PayPal account. I don't have a separate checking account, although in hindsight that probably would be a good idea, but I've been doing this now for a number of years. I've never had any, knock on wood, never had any problems. So for me, I do not separate them.
Likewise, on the subject of whether or not PayPal lets you have 2 accounts, I know as an individual they don't let you have 2 accounts because it's linked to basically your identity. So you would be masquerading as a different person. That would be fraud. You might be able to do it with a business account. I haven't tried that.
Cold-hearted truth. You gotta love it right there. Yeah. Masquerading, that would be fraud.
I like that he defined it for us.
That's right.
It's a bad thing. What's that word? Fraud.
Fraud.
As for me, I don't separate my bank accounts or anything like that. I just literally this week I went through and did my expenses and earnings and whatnot so that I would have them for taxes. So mostly I just keep track of it. And it's not that hard to figure out which expenses are which. If I did an LLC, I would get a business account. I did that for a different business venture I did in the past, but I have found it to be horribly complex. Well, not horribly complex, but it added a level of complexity that I felt was unnecessary, particularly because I was in both cases now and then in a low-risk field where I don't think I'm likely to be sued, even if I am, according to my accountant. People have figured out how to get around the whole LLC thing if they want to get at your assets. So it's just a matter of how expensive their lawyer is. So yeah, I just keep track.
For myself, I started out not worrying about it, and I've also heard that you should have a separate business account. So I have several accounts all under the same, like I log into my bank account and like here's my savings, here's the account that my income from my writing goes into, and then I pay myself out of that account. But I was pretty far along before I bothered with that. If you're not making any money yet, or you're like under a couple thousand a month, I don't really know that you need to worry about it if it's kind of part-time income. And we have no knowledge for being tax advisors, so you see a tax advisor, all that kind of stuff. I also don't think an LLC is that great for writers. You get to a point where an S corporation can make sense because it saves you on self-employment tax. That's, again, kind of like when you start, like when this is going to become full-time income at that level usually is when you want to start worrying about that. Just starting out, I probably wouldn't worry about it. I do just have one PayPal account. Smashwords is the only one that pays me into PayPal, so I don't worry too much about it. It's kind of minimal compared to everything else. I upload everywhere directly just about now, so my Smashwords checks are not that big. But and I do pay for some cover art and that kind of stuff out of PayPal if the person accepts it. So we're probably not the best examples, quite honestly. I haven't been audited yet, so I will continue to hope that won't be the case. I do have an accountant now, so at least I don't have to go it alone if that happens. But I used TurboTax for several, like the first 3 years, I think, of this, and it wasn't until the income got high enough that I kind of realized that I was just throwing money away because I wasn't able to write off that much, so.
The same thing happened to me. And let me tell you this: if you're afraid of being audited, if the problem if you mistake you're making is that you're giving the government too much money, you're very safe from an audit.
I think that's me. I think that was me for sure.
I'm good. Then I don't have anything to worry about.
Because I was always like, oh, I'm not writing off, I'm not going to write off meals. I don't have a car. Most of the things that are red flags, it'd be kind of hard to write off as a writer. Travel is kind of where I think you can get into people start looking at things a little more closely. But again, we don't really know how we do it is probably not the best way to do it. So talk to your accountant. But if you're just getting started, I really wouldn't worry about it until you're actually making some, until this is like paying the mortgage kind of thing. And then you can afford to pay for an accountant, and it's a business expense because you're paying for it out of your earnings. So there you go. All right, our topic. Talking about, before we get into series, I guess we'll just kind of touch on what we know about standalone books. We haven't really had anybody on who's rocked it yet with standalone novels. So we'll just kind of say what we would do, how to market things if you have a standalone book. I would say that for me, I've had 2 books that started as standalones that I did not intend to make into series. For me, that was Encrypted, which was set in my Emperor's Edge world, but completely different characters, so it wasn't a real obvious. Still, a lot of people have not read those books, even though I kind of tied it into the main series. And then the other one was my first Dragonblood book. I never really thought that was going to be a series. So when I published it, it was essentially a standalone novel. And that was one where I just tried to really make it a good sound blurb. I built it as a fantasy romance, which I still don't know if it's romancy enough to count for that. But that and steampunk. I did steampunk, of course, because it's not as competitive a category. And I had the airplanes, basically, and some steampunky-ish stuff. So I think if you are doing a standalone, I'd really go hunting on Amazon for a category that's not as competitive, but that it makes sense for your book to be in to start with. If you have a really good cover, that was kind of my $1.99 designs thing. We talked about that last week on cover art, where it may or may not be a good experience for you, but in this case, I found a good designer, and I really liked the design, and I've stuck with them for like 8 books now. So it had a good cover, so it sold pretty well, even though it was in a totally new world and it had nothing to do with my other stuff. But I also wasn't coming into it brand new, right? I had readers from my other series. So if you're brand new, I think it's going to be the same thing as with a series. It's going to be tough with your first book. It becomes, as you get more, even if you publish more standalone books, I think you're better off than if you just have one book. It's really tough. But I remember listening to an interview with, I want to say it's Liliana Hart. Does that sound right, guys? You guys don't know, but I think she did thrillers, and her tagline was like, thrillers with heart. And I thought that was great because they were all standalone books, but she had this tagline, and I hope I'm attributing this to the right author. Apologies if I'm not. So the tagline applied to all of her books, even though they were all standalone thrillers with different sets of characters in each one. And I thought that made a lot of sense. It was almost like turning it into a series. It's like, this is your brand. So I would kind of look at all of the books you're planning and see what's similar about them that makes them yours, what's your style, and give it a tagline like that, and try to kind of almost treat it as a series, even if it's not, and you can put like the excerpt to the next one in the back of the one you just finished. And in some genres, that's going to work better than others. Obviously, we're going to talk about romance as one of our series options later on, because people expect that you're going to have different characters in each one. And I think with some sci-fi too, I agree that standalone can, if it's idea-based science fiction, maybe you just have the one book for the idea. I remember reading a bunch of the Michael Crichton books when I was in high school, and I think I probably read however many were out at the time, even though they had different characters in each one. But his books all had, that kind of scary, creepy, a little bit of science thriller, so they had something in common that made you want to go on and read them. So I would look for that common element in yours and really try to ramp that up and emphasize that. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. If the issue is not that you can't write a lot of books, but that you don't write in series, then certainly finding a way to sort of push yourself as the brand and the books is just the next, like if it was me, then the next Lalo book is out. And once people have the expectation of your style of writing, then you can still develop fans as an author. And there are plenty of major authors, obviously. Like Stephen King doesn't really have that many. Well, technically, all of Stephen King's books are related to one another, but he doesn't have that many direct sequels. So, like, if you write well enough and you have a strong enough voice, then you can market yourself as though all of your books were a series. And I like the tagline thing. I had not thought of that, and it's a clever idea because it lets people know that these are books of a common ilk, and if you like one, you'll probably like the others.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea about the tagline too, and just like Joe, I hadn't thought about that either. It's like the whole time I'm like, how can I apply this to like the new mystery novel? And oh crap, my spot's coming up. Okay, here we go. But and me personally, I haven't written a book that was in a series, but if I did, I would definitely, in your back matter, you definitely want to make it easier for your readers to find your other works. That's an absolute given. Knowing me, I would probably put it in the front and put it in the back, and put excerpts in the back saying, hey, if you like this, you check it out. Same style of writing, that sort of thing. But yeah, you just want to make it as easy as possible for readers to find your other titles, plain and simple.
And something we talked about before when I did my serial with the pen name is that if it is a standalone story, that may also be something to consider, especially if it's your first novel and you're kind of afraid that it's going to be tough to get discovered. If it's something that could be broken up into a serial, you don't have to publish it that way indefinitely. You could start out seeing if it breaks up into 4 or 6 parts. First publishing it that way, almost like when they publish stories in magazines, an ongoing saga. And try it out. There are some more advertising things you can do, and you can drop the first one to 99 cents or even free to try to get people to try out the story. So that may be something to consider. And you can always lump it back together later, take your favorite title out of or your favorite cover and just turn it into a book later. Nothing's permanent. So that would be something else. That would be something I would think about if I was like, okay, I just have this one novel, don't have a fan base yet. Let's see how I can market it and actually get people to buy it.
I should say also, while I've never had a standalone that had a huge amount of success because they all eventually became series, my Free Wrench series, which I just finished the third one, that was my Nano project this year. The first book, before there was a second book, and there was no indication that it was necessarily going to be a series, ended up being featured by Apple. And that was on the strength of the writing, the blurb, and the cover. So it's, what is ostensibly a standalone book can still catch on. It just has to follow all the same rules as any other book that you want to sell well. It's got to look good and it's got to present itself well.
So yeah, definitely, if you write a standalone and a big name company says, hey, we're going to feature you, just pick up the notebook and start jotting down ideas for the second, because you were going to get people that say, hey, cool, when's the next one?
If it's at all open-ended, you're going to immediately get people who are like, more then? Yeah. You don't want to say, no more, because you're just leaving money on the table at that point.
Yeah, the interest is high. You capitalize it on while you can.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm now about to publish my 7th book in the Dragon Blood series that started as a standalone. So if you enjoy the characters and you can think of more ideas, it's worth doing. But yeah, you don't have to. I think Neil Gaiman was who I was trying to think of earlier as someone who doesn't necessarily write series, I don't think. Have you guys read all this stuff? I've only read like 2. I think he's kind of a standalone guy.
I've read most of it. Sometimes there's tangential connections between them, but yeah, I don't think there's that many direct sequels at all. There's a couple of short story follow-ups, but yeah, almost every one of his things, while sharing common themes, tends to be its own setting and story.
Right. I think it's a harder road to choose. You'll often hear from self-publishers, just do a series, start publishing a series, and that's the money's in the series. So I guess if that's your thing, you just have to accept that, maybe it's going to take some years in order to really kind of establish yourself as a brand and get enough books out there and gain a following. But I'm sure it can be done. Maybe we'll find somebody to interview that's rock it. Maybe we'll get Neil Gaiman on. I'm sure he listens.
No, yeah, absolutely. He's probably the one of the 2 or 3 viewers that we get every week.
I'm sure he is. All right, but since we're all series people and we know a little bit more about that, or at least have a little more experience, let's kind of jump into that now, and just talk about. There's probably I put down 3. If we come up with any more, 3 types of series, or if you guys come up with more when you're listening, feel free to comment on the show. marketingsff.com. We get so many commenters because I can't pronounce the URL. But anyway, so types of series. The first one we're going to talk about is the kind where you've got standalone stories with the same characters, but each story is like a complete novel, and there may or may not be kind of an overarching plot going on, but usually people can jump into these books, book 14, and they can kind of get what's going on and enjoy the book. So this is really common in mystery. I would say it's kind of tough, and I honestly don't know how you write this type of series. I would have a hard time. I always write stuff that relies on having read the previous books, but I guess I would think of the Vorkosigan books by Bujold as someone where there's a lot of history and you want to have read the previous books, but you could technically kind of jump in and anywhere in the series. I used to read Stephen Brust used to do those Dragira books. I don't know. You guys can think of more examples than I can, I'm sure. But so we're going to kind of each give some marketing pros and cons. So one thing with this kind of series where each one is a complete book, one of the pros is you can advertise any book in the series, so you don't have to stick with doing your book 1 over and over again, which there's only so many times, even if you're lucky enough to get BookBub ads, there's only so many times you can run your book 1 in a series, like maybe once a year to the sponsorship sites. Any more than that, and you're just kind of wasting your money because it's going out to the same audience. So it can be tough to, like, I'm going to be on book 7 of this series, but I'm still advertising book 1 and the 3-book box set because you have to start at the beginning. That's just how mine is. With this kind of series, maybe you can market book 5 and still get new people into it, and each successive book could potentially be a bestseller or a top 100 in a category and a jumping in point for the series. Okay, Joe's going to go next.
Yes. One of the other pros is that not being tied to an overarching story means you have greater flexibility with future books to change the story to follow the themes that resonated most with readers. So if you had planned out, a 5-book arc, and after book 3 you find that some of your side characters and their adventures are by far the most popular, you sort of can't upheave the entire thing because you laid out all the, your carefully laid plans are not going to necessarily inform that new plot line. But if you have it's a bunch of standalone stories, and over time, again, certain members of the cast turn out to be stronger than others, you can cater future stories to your strengths and adapt over time. That's something I've learned with almost all of my series, is that eventually some side characters turn out to be the fan favorites, but I can't always alter the story to use them better. So standalones would help with that.
And I was just thinking too, is going off a little bit what Lindsay was saying with the not having to advertise book 1 over and over and over, is if you have a whole bunch of standalone books, let's say in a series or whatnot, you can participate in more of the multi-author book sets or box sets there and use different titles and not have to worry about because you can only participate in so many box sets, but you want the same stinking title, and yes, it draws people in, but you can actually shake it up a little bit and select a different title in there, and it's not necessary to read the old ones in order to follow along.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for not having to keep advertising the same book over and over, because there's always more people out there, but you'll find that if you do get BookBub again for the book later in the year, you probably won't get the kind of same results you got for the first time the ad ran. Although they seem to be better than, maybe they have a lot of churn on the mailing list, but they seem to be better than some of the other sites for that. But still, it's tough. You can, if you're 5 years into your series and you've already done book 1, I'll actually redo the covers sometimes I've done that with some box sets just to try to well, maybe last time you didn't like the cover and you didn't check out my book one, but this time, look, new cover, so check it out. So there's things you can do, but yeah, it'd be cool if I could get ads for later books in the series. And so some of the cons of this kind of the standalone stories, I would say that, you know, readers may not be quite as compelled to continue on when the novel is wrapped up really well at the end of each story. You know, I'm not saying you have to do cliffhangers, but if it's just stopping point, they may stop and, you know, maybe they'll check it out, maybe they'll check the next one, but maybe they won't. So that can be, I guess, you know, you see this a lot in TV series, right? In the old days, like the original Star Trek, they were all complete stories, right? You hardly ever had even a two-parter, but you've kind of seen Hollywood drift away from that, you know, with like Battlestar Galactica, right? It was all, most of them were kind of cliffhanger endings where you wanted to see what's going on next, and you have an overarching 4-season kind of thing. And I think that with the TV shows, you'd see that what I actually liked about the original Star Trek is you could jump in anywhere. You didn't have to start with one. Was actually pretty bad, if I seem to recall. I don't know, the pilot, but you know.
I love it when you go uber nerd on us. It's absolutely fantastic.
Spock had the really crazy eyebrows in the pilot, and he was like, Captain Kirk wasn't even there. I remember it. All right, so I loved that, but you may actually get more readers if you do kind of the series where there are cliffhangers. People, they get really invested when they're reading from the beginning and want to see how things finish. So, yep, I'll pass it on to Joe. Marketing cons.
I should say also on the subject of what Lindsay was saying, if you're particularly bad at marketing and you write a lot of standalone stories, people might not even know that it's a series. Like, you'd have to, like, especially when your stories wrap up very nicely, you need to make sure that the ancillary stuff and the back matter makes it very clear there are other stories in this series. Because I've run into the situation where I've read a book, oh, that was a nice book. There are a couple of Discworld books, and the Discworld series is a situation where there are a lot of very standalone stories within the series. There are a few of them where if you did not know that it was Discworld was a series as opposed to just, you know, a Thief of Time, you wouldn't know to look for others. So that's something you need to do. But another point with marketing con for this is readers who follow the full series, people who do buy through and read all of your books, there are a few things you're going to need to do if you're treating each book as a standalone. You're going to establish characters, you're going to establish setting. And this happened, I found, when I read like the Dresden Files, like from beginning to end. They have to keep on reintroducing the characters in every single book, and it gets really tiresome for your loyal readers, because you're like, oh yeah, I know about the mouse, I know about the big dog, I know about the big cat, I know that he decorates his apartment with textures instead of colors. Like they'll notice the same phrases showing up, and it can be glaring at times. So that's a risk you run when you make each book standalone.
Yeah, isn't that something that author that wrote the Aragon series? It was like the first 4 or 5 pages of his book. Every single one of it was like a quick synopsis of the previous book. I was like, okay, well, you know, his don't get me wrong, his books are good, but they're so dang complex. You need that stuff there, and some readers just like, okay, well, I just finished that book. I don't need to go into detail or like a book summary or a book report or something or other. But my thing is, I'd be thinking if you release a lot of standalones, I mean, that you'd have to try and find some. I just keep calling it a pull in my head. Some aspect of your book that makes it sound appealing to the reader. Because if you already wrote one that did a really good job and you covered a certain plot line, the reader's going to go, okay, awesome, that was great, thank you very much. Okay, well, I've got another book out that's, you know, going along the same lines. You know, maybe it's like 2 different characters but going through the same type of thing. The client, too many clients calls today. The reader's going to go, well, you know what? Isn't this kind of like what you already covered? I mean, you have to keep coming up with different interesting things happening to keep the person coming back to it, or else you have to use like cliffhangers or something. But cliffhangers can crucify if you don't do it well. But yeah, that'd be my con on that, I would think.
Right, and those Dresden books, those don't sell at all, so definitely don't do what he's doing.
I'm just saying it becomes glaring for some people.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, though, that a lot of these books will not have much character growth, or it's really slow. It's kind of like episodic television, where no matter what lesson they learned in the half-hour sitcom, everybody starts at the same spot in the next episode. So and it's going to depend on what your style is and what you like to do as a writer too. So maybe that's fine, or maybe and then there are readers who really like that each story is kind of formulaic. Obviously, as I said, this works hugely well in the mystery genre. It's been a long time since I've checked into the mystery genre, but I read a lot of those Cat Who books by Lillian Jackson Braun, I think it was, because my mom read them and she had like 20 of them on their shelf, and they're all the same. But you read it because you like the characters, right? The cats are cute, they do their thing. I don't remember the hero's name, Quillian, something like that. I don't know.
Quillerin.
Oh, you read them too.
Yeah, my wife got me started on those, but it's the same sort of thing. Like, you read one, oh, that was cute. Ooh, they got another one. Okay, let's grab that one. Or, ooh, they got another one over there. So yeah, I've checked them out at the library. I've bought them. I've checked out audiobooks. I mean, it's a great way to pass the time if you're on a long road trip.
Yeah, so if you really, as the reader, really likes what you did in the first book and really like the characters, they may just want more of the same experience. So that is definitely a valid strategy for writing a series.
I'll definitely let you know how it goes, because my mystery novel, I'm kind of basing it off like the Cat Who type of things, just with corgis. Yeah. So see how well it goes.
I don't know if dogs can solve mysteries, Jeff. I'm not sure I'm a believer.
Dogs are smarter than cats, in my opinion.
Whoa, I don't know. I'm going to be watching these to see if you're going to have like
I'll
cat
keep you posted.
All right. No, that'll be great. Animal stuff that's a niche on Cozy Mysteries. There's an animal subcategory, so you can go jump all over that.
I was planning on it.
All right. Do you have the same artist that's going to do the cover art?
No, actually, because she don't get me wrong, she is a fantastic artist, but every time I contact her, it jumps up in price. So she's like, oh, you keep selling more books, I'm going to keep charging you more. I'm like, all right. So I'm thinking like, okay, it's getting to the point where, oh my God, I'll keep using her for the fantasy stuff, but for the mystery stuff, it's either I think I'm going to give some other artist, a starving artist, a try. Maybe they'll charge me less or something. We'll see.
Yeah, well, as we were talking about last week, some of my best-selling books are just the Photoshop covers that are really inexpensive. So,
trust me, I'm contemplating that. Like, I could probably do that. I know enough of my way around Photoshop. Maybe I can do that. So, we'll see.
All right, moving on to the next kind of series. This is, I think, kind of what we all do basically, is where each book is part of a complete story with the same characters. You might have cliffhanger endings, not really because you're necessarily trying to like gyp the reader, but just all part of like all six books are one story, and I think that's pretty common, like in epic fantasy. I don't know if this isn't common in sci-fi. I have to think about it. We had Rachel Bach on, Rachel Aaron / Bach, and she had a trilogy that was like that were space opera cliffhanger endings at the end of each one, and it worked because I read the whole trilogy in like 3 days. So I fell for it. So with this kind of story, I would say some of the pros are, that sense of incompleteness. Like the characters haven't yet, figured out their relationship, whatever kind of relationships you're doing, if it's romance or the mentor apprentice kind of thing. You get involved in it. You want to see what happens, how it's going to play out. And often in the first book, it's really just kind of introducing things and just giving you a teaser of the world. So for marketing, that can definitely be a pro as long as too cranky. But I think a well-crafted series like this is one where there's a big plot over however many books you're doing, but each individual novel still does have some resolution in it and some character growth, so people feel they got a complete story, but there's enough loose ends at the end that they do need to go on and see what's going to happen in the next book. So that can be really compelling, and like if you get people to buy one book, maybe they'll go on and read the whole series.
Yeah, I think it's very important to leave them, to make it clear that there is something that happens next and make them really, really interested in what that thing is. And cliffhangers are the easiest way to do that, but they're manipulative in some people's eyes. Honestly, though, I haven't got that many complaints about my notable cliffhanger at the end of book 1. All right, but another marketing pro for series of this type is that, unlike the first type of series where there's sort of has to be a reset button between each book, you can have books where the characters have ongoing growth, and if your characters grow and develop and they start to overcome their flaws, the readers can get much more connected, much more invested in those characters, and that's the sort of thing that will really help drive them to the next book in the series. The next book in the series is these two are going to get together. That person's finally overcoming this fear. It's just it's a good way to drive reader engagement. And another point is when you drive people from book one, like again, we're marketing a full series now, so you have to rely on book one. Sending people to book one of a long series means that each wave of new readers produces a progressively longer list of books that they could potentially buy through. So while they have longer to go to get through your entire series, each new generation of readers is more income for you than the previous generation. So that's handy too.
Definitely. Mine is, I was thinking each consecutive title that you release and something like that, pretty much you already have a fan base established for it, so there's little use to actually heavily advertise for that particular book. I mean, I'm getting ready to release, here in a little while, my Tales of Lantari book 6. I'm like, okay, well, I could, heavily promote it, but I was like, you know what, I'd rather, say, hey, it's all the fans of you guys out there, hey, there's book number 6, and then again, push number 1 to get you started, so you can just bump all the way down through the books there. Which I've also noted here can also be a con for that exact reason there. But oh well.
Right, like when I have a new book coming out in my series, I know all the marketing I'm going to do for that book is to announce to my list, it's out, or here's the order, make a few tweets, do a little bit on Facebook, and you can kind of invest your time in getting right into the next book in the series. And if you keep marketing that first book, like Joe was saying, you'll keep getting new readers into it. And if they find it, and you've got 8 more books in the series, or however many it's going to be, yeah, it's suddenly worth it to spend some time on marketing and time and money, because there's a lot more than when you just have one book, like you are marketing the standalone, like we talked about, that you're selling for $3 or $4. The most you can earn on a sale is like $2. Compared it to an 8-book series where each novel is $5 and you're making $3 something on each book, there's a lot more potential gain, if they get into book 1 and they like it and they continue on. And I do think we can learn too from what the television people are doing. Things do seem to be trending more this way with the cliffhangers on the end of the season, or a lot of shows now it's cliffhanger every episode. So it works. Readers hate it, and they buy the next one anyway. So it's completely up to you. Like we talked about the Dresden Files as an example of, you don't have to do that. Each one can be a complete book in itself. But I think like epic fantasy really lends itself really well to this kind of storytelling, just because you're building an entire world. A lot of science fiction, same way. If you're doing space opera, you're probably building maybe a whole galaxy, or at least a solar system. And so you got to have a story that fits with it. Yep, so anyway, pros, same thing, or I guess, marketing cons for this type of series. We kind of talked about that you do really need people to start with book 1. So, like, even though if I have book 7 in my series coming out this month, and even if it ranks pretty well, nobody's going to just randomly pick up book 7 in the series. You can tell even from the blurb that you're not going to know what's going on. Like, who are these people? They don't sound like there's a whole bunch of names mentioned, and that's not usually typical with a book you're just going to jump in at. One thing you can do that a lot of people are doing now, including myself, is as an alternative, once you do have like 4 more books in the series, box up the first 3, do some sales where you run them for 99 cents briefly, unless they sell like hotcakes, and then you might leave it that way. But even if you just drop it down to 99 cents for a little bit, and the usual price is like $7.99 or $9.99, if you get some ads, you can really get a lot of new people into your series. And I've definitely found that if they read the first 3 books, they're probably even more committed to the series than they are if they just read the first book. So at least it gives you something else to advertise besides always that book 1. Okay, but we're talking about cons, so on to Joe.
Yeah, okay. One of the big cons I discovered is when you're driving people to book 1, especially if it's a long series, that means you wrote that book a long time ago. It's representative of your earlier writing, and your earlier writing might not be as good. If you're always improving, then your earlier writing is, by definition, your worst writing, and that's continually where you're going to have to drive people. So that's problematic. I've improved over the course of my series, but if I can't, if people get stuck on the first book because it's a first attempt, you're stuck with that because it's still book one in my series, and it's still where people have to start. I've tried to have different entry points, and we've discussed in other shows on how you can try doing that. But if you're improving, the longer your series is, the harder it is to get people hooked on the first one in comparison to the last one because of the quality gap. And the other thing is, keeping a series too long can produce reader and story fatigue. Like, let's say you plotted something out to be 5 books or 7 books, and it's going really well, and you want to keep writing it. Pretty soon, it's going to feel like you're being strung along. Like, unless you really planned this out to have a lot of potential threads and a lot of different arcs, keeping a series going on too long is really going to start to have repetitive things, or people are going to have to keep on, setback after setback, and it's just going to feel like a TV series has gone on too long. Where didn't we see this in season 3? So that's something else you have to look out for. Not so much a marketing thing, but just a threat for a series in general.
Yeah, mine goes right along with that. I was saying, you know what? I've seen too many series where the first part, first bunch of books in the series, going's great. It's good writing, keeps you intrigued, but as time progresses, you're like, been there, done this. Okay, I'll get to that book when I feel like it. Move on to something new. So mine is, quality of writing can definitely suffer if the author feels like they need to, run this cash cow as much as possible and keep pumping out titles in that particular series. So if you're going to keep writing in the series, man alive, keep it good and keep it interesting to keep the readers coming back.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with Joe as a con, because like my Emperor's Edge series, the first book was my first book. And I don't think it's horrible, but I've gone back to reread it, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'd probably do things maybe a little differently now. And it's tough when that's book 1 and 8 books. It's like, and I've seen that with other authors I've read too, like where I just couldn't get into their first book, and I've had a friend that, it gets great around book 3. I'm like, I'm not gonna suffer through book 1, so that maybe I'll really enjoy it later on. And fortunately, some readers are nicer, less pickier than some others. But
back to book 1 and maybe trying to clean it up a little bit, because I've had people subtly suggest that maybe I should do that to my book 1, because I did the same thing. I started reading, I'm like, oh dude, I'm better than this. Okay, I've learned a lot, okay?
Yeah, my stuff was like grammatically okay, so there wasn't anything that I would necessarily do unless I wanted to just rewrite everything and start all over again. But it's, you learn as an author, and you learn what works and what doesn't. And yeah, Joe's right. Sometimes your book 1 was not your best book, and there you go. It's the beginning of a series. So, or like with my Dragonblood stuff, where it wasn't meant to be a series. I really love book 1, actually, to be quite honest, and boost my own ego here and self-inflate. I love book 1, but it doesn't feel at all like the start of a series. So yeah, that's where the 3-book box set came in handy, because I think book 3 feels like the start of that series. But anyway, as I continue to talk all about my stuff, I agree that with those marketing cons. And I think that it's probably a good idea to think of your, like an end of a series before you get to like book 10, or I agree that there are some series that, I don't know, as a reader I felt they've gone on too long, and I've kind of wondered, and I think all readers wonder this, like if the author was just offered so much money that, like, yep, I'm going to keep writing, he's going to keep having sword fights, and it's the same story over and over again, but they sell amazing. So I have no idea, because I don't come from the traditional publishing world, how it goes. So, but even as indie authors, you can be tempted, right? If you've got one particular, like especially if you have multiple series you started, but you have one that's way outsells the other one, it's kind of tempting to build on that one. Yeah. All right. So moving on to our last type of series, which I don't know, this may not be applicable so much in fantasy and science fiction. I don't know how many of you out there are kind of doing hybrid, where it's a romance in addition to being whatever fantasy. I don't know. We'll have to let us know if you're at like Paranormal Romance and you actually listen to us. I never know if that's enough fantasy that people, kind of put it gets lumped in with urban fantasy. So I have no idea. But so last series we're talking about is like a romance series where each book features a new couple, and there's a happily ever after at the end for that couple, and it it might be tied into kind of an overarching plot or something going on, but usually it's more heavily romance in that people can jump in anywhere in the series because you're being introduced to this hero and heroine. And for examples, I don't know, Linnea Sinclair has a science fiction romance series. I think they're called the Doc 5 books. She's done like 6, 7, 8, I'm not sure. Quite a few of them, and they're all in a series. They're really loosely connected. Some of the characters are like related to other characters. But each one's an individual story. But if you like romance, then I think you want to see that happen and often check them out even when they're new characters. But I would say for this kind of series, some of the pros are, it's kind of like with the standalones, right? Any one of them can be individually advertised and can be a jumping in point for a new reader. So that makes it nice. I would say, as somebody who's written the science fiction romances, I find it kind of tough. I think people will read them, but I think my strength is more of having characters that continue on through a whole series and that people come to really like over 8 books or something like that. So, but anyway, marketing goes on to Joe.
Yeah, I find this a lot with like romance in general, but in that genre, there's a strong reader expectation of content. There's certain story you want to read, there's certain events you want to see, and so your readers, more so than most other genres, come in with an expectation which, if you fulfill, can produce extremely loyal fans. So basically, whereas you might get a curious reader on a series that's not a romance, on a series that is a romance, the reader knows exactly what they want, and you know exactly what they want. So it's much easier to cater your story, and if you've got the skill to pull it off, yeah, it's much easier to produce a loyal fan base because you know before they come into it exactly the things they're going to want.
Man meets woman, man falls in love with woman, man does something stupid and loses woman, and then man does something embarrassing and wins woman back. So, I mean, I've only read a few romance novels. You can thank again my wife for that one, but one of my marketing pro there would be is like you are pretty much playing to the largest piece of the overall reader pie. There's money to be made if you can write something that that follows along those key critical components that we've had other people in our podcast say that they're just certain things to be expected, and as long as you have them there and you end it well and nice and happy, everybody falls in love, gets together, then man, it's going to sell because there's people out there that I know just about all my computer tech clients, and they always like, I always look at their bookshelves and romance novels galore is like the most common genre out there. So write something good, then yeah, you will pick up readers. Get a really good cover with the chiseled 6-pack abs or something or other, man, it's going to sell like hotcakes.
I will say, actually, in science fiction and romance, or excuse me, science fiction and fantasy, I think if you do paranormal romance, there's a lot of readers out there. I think it's still kind of finding its way with science fiction and like secondary world fantasy. I can only think of a handful of authors writing secondary world fantasy romance that's selling well. So it could be kind of an up-and-coming niche now that Amazon actually has categories. They have a fantasy romance category and a sci-fi romance category. I don't think it's necessarily a cash cow because you got to have people that want romance and that want science fiction, which is kind of a small part of the diagram. But I do agree with you that if you get them and you have a whole series, they will go buy them all. They love that. With my pen name stuff, I have 5 books in the core series, and I've had people say they read them in a weekend. And that's less common, I think, with steampunk and epic fantasy and sci-fi. It can happen.
Romance. What kind of cover would that be? Like man and woman on dragon? I mean.
Oh, let me see if I can grab one. All right, here's something I'm going to see if I can get on the show because she's from Seattle area. Here it is. Amy Raby, I'm not sure I'm saying her name right. She writes fantasy romance, and she's from the Seattle area, so I kind of know who she is, but I don't think she knows who I am, so it'll be fun when I try to get her on the show. Like, hey, I'm stalking you. Come join us. But, I'm not sure she's... I know with Linnea Sinclair, they didn't renew... What I heard was they didn't renew her contract because they didn't sell hugely. I think it's something traditional publishing is not really touching so much right now. Yes, to paranormal romance, that's really popular. That's a different kind of thing. It's set on Earth. I think it's more accessible. But to the secondary world science fiction romance and the secondary world fantasy romance, I feel like it's still finding its way a little bit. But anyway, so some of the cons with a romance is that because the story doesn't continue on, it's a happily ever after, you probably want to find a way to kind of tie things. Like, what I did is I have the side characters that are in the first one become the heroes in the next one, and so there's a lot of like people that are side characters that go on to become the next heroes, and that's kind of one way to get people to jump into the next book because they want to see those characters have their moment in the sun, or it's in another solar system, their moment in the stars. So there are tricks you can do, and I love listening to the romance writers when they do interviews and podcasts because those guys are really smart business people, and that's kind of where I got that trick from, right? Have the main character have 3 brothers or 3 sisters that are going to be the next people that get set up in the next following books. And I've also seen some romance out there that is serialized so that it's not actually a happily ever after with the first book. So that's possibly a way to get around some of the cons, but I don't know. Give me your thoughts, guys.
Yeah, one of my cons that I could foresee with this is that the longer the series lasts, the greater the threat of feeling repetitive or formulaic. One of the pros was that there is a definite formula and a definite expectation, but the problem with that is again, once you've mastered that, differentiating one story from the next, or for that matter, your story from all of the other stories, can become progressively more difficult. So I feel like a long romance series is got to be one of the most difficult things to do well without just becoming extremely stale or just cookie cutter repeating yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I can't believe I'm going to admit this on air, but my wife has got me reading a couple of Nora Roberts books. And don't get me wrong, she definitely knows how to write. She's a very good, art or author there. But like you read one book there and you read another one, and you're like, there's almost times I swear she just swaps the names around there because it's like same characters, same type of behaviors. I mean, the same settings and all the same type of things just going along there. So no wonder she can write so darn fast because a lot of these books are really close to being the same. So that would be hard. Is trying to, as Joe was saying, is differentiate. Try and find something something different that the person would, or like a reader would go, okay, well, this one has this, and this one, oh, that, reading the blurb, that sounds good. I'll give that one a try. But instead, it's like everything looks to be on the same type of plot and storyline there. So, like I was saying, man meets woman, woman, man fall in love, and something happens and it drives them apart, and something happens that drives them back together. I mean, they all does the same thing there. So it would be hard for a romance writer to find something to keep it lively, keep it entertaining, and keep it different.
All right, we're not going to let Jeffrey teach the romance writing webinar that we have planned for the future, so don't worry, guys.
Oh, is that all I had to do to make sure I didn't have to teach that? Oh, no, okay. Yeah, romance writers are no.
No, it's an interesting genre because people that pick it up, they want what they want, and it's definitely formulaic, which can be hard as an author. I would say having done like 5 in that series, that it's definitely tough to you have to come up with new characters for every book, and I try to give them quirks and stuff like that. But once I have characters, I really start to like them, and I want to give them a 7 or 8 book series as they deserve. So that's one of the challenges. And but yeah, for marketing, it can be tough to make I don't know, if you get a series and it works, I think the readers will go on and continue to read and maybe. I don't know if I wouldn't say they're less picky or less discerning readers. That's probably not true. I know some of the most critical, scathing reviews I've read on Amazon are by people reading romance novels, so you can't make any assumptions. But yep, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, you think fantasy reviewers are bad? Holy cow! I've seen a few of those romance ones, or like I'd read one of those books, like, it's not the greatest. I could leave a review, I suppose, and I check the book and I look at some of the reviews. I'm like, man, I have nothing compared to what some of these people are blasting this poor. I start feeling bad for the author. Like, no, I'll just bite my tongue and just say, okay, move on to the next one. Oh well.
All right, so I think we're about done talking about series. If there's any other that's kind of the 3 types of series I came up with when I was coming up with a list. I don't know if there's anything else out there that anybody's wondering about. Feel free to leave us a comment or ask a question. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else should we just wrap it up? And any other series caveats or things you've learned that you want to warn people about?
Yeah, about romance. Romance is so cookie. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
If you want to send your complaints, romance readers, to Jeffrey Poole, he's on Facebook.
No comprendo. Hablo español solamente ahora. Lo siento. Or je ne comprends pas, n'est-ce pas? Whatever floats your boat.
Well, so you only speak 2 different languages, 3 if you count your own. I have nothing more to add for the series stuff. I don't know. Speaking, not good at it. So you speak 3 languages. I speak half.
Let's hope people stopped listening 5 minutes ago. Okay, we are done for today's show.
I can edit these things.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully something was useful to you. If you want to hear Jeff give more advice on romance novels, just let us know. We can make that happen.
If we haven't inspired you, by all means, go ahead and subscribe to us and see how many other people we can annoy or inspire. Or yeah, let's see. Lindsay's email to contact you. Her email is...
I'm now going to try to find somebody who's doing paranormal romance and just killing it, who can come give us some tips on how to actually sell romance well. So we'll see if we can find that person. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
All right. You guys take it easy. Bye-bye.